Okay, Mr. Chairman, you are free to call the meeting to order.
All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call the July 23rd, 2020 City County Planning Board virtual work session to order. Thank everyone for attending on a rainy day. And Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our board members and to staff and to our guests and anybody who's joined early today. The first item on our agenda is affordable housing presentation, and Matt Weber with Grounded Solutions Network is joining us today all the way from Michigan, and Matt's going to be providing a presentation to the board. So as a bit of background, you guys have heard me mention that the city of Winston-Salem is participating in the For Everyone Home initiative, and it's an inaugural event. We were one of 3 cities, along with San Antonio and Indianapolis, who were selected to participate in this. And at the end of the day, a lot of the focus is on affordable housing, long-lasting affordable housing, and really a lot of issues around housing, such as evictions and displacement and things of that nature, and trying to work on and develop strategies to address those issues. So as you know, affordable housing is the #1 item on City Council's strategic plan, and we have talked about that on many occasions in your previous year's work program, and it'll continue to be a theme moving forward. So Matt has got a presentation that he has given to our Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee, and actually in several other venues here in Winston-Salem. And I thought the information was interesting and it'll be good for the board to see it. And you'll be hearing more about our work through For Everyone Home as this continues to progress. So without further ado, I'll introduce Matt Weber with Grounded Solutions Network, and I will turn it over to him.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm going to share my screen because PowerPoint is what we do, right? So I've got this PowerPoint, and let's make sure that you all are able to see that. Aaron, you're seeing the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Great. So, and thank you very much to the Planning Commission for making time to hear this presentation. I am sharing a somewhat reduced version of it to save on time. I think the core of it is still here, but I'm skipping a few slides, touching a little bit more lightly on other topics, and happy to take questions at the end. And then if there's time and the chair permits, I actually have a set of questions that I'd love to have you all weigh in on, just because you've got such great representation of perspectives and so much deep knowledge there. I don't want to miss this opportunity to hear from you. So if there's time, I'd love to hear you all answer those questions. As Aaron mentioned, I'm with Grounded Solutions Network. It is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting equitable and inclusive communities that are rich in opportunity for all. The For Everyone Home initiative that I'm here to talk about today is one of our efforts to reach that goal of more inclusive communities. As Aaron said, it is an anti-displacement and inclusive growth initiative aimed at mixed market cities, and that's really kind of a key term for us. The entire initiative came from our experience working in what people would call hot market cities, places where they're just in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. And we'd get called in and asked to help solve that crisis for them. And that was hard. One of our takeaways from that experience is that you really do need to start early, start before you hit crisis levels. The earlier you start, the more room there is to make an impact on those affordable housing needs. So we put together the For Everyone Home initiative, put out a call for applications, went through a competitive process to select participating cities, and Winston-Salem, along with San Antonio and Indianapolis, were the 3 cities we selected to participate. And you can see there on your screen the members of our local team who've been working with us on the Winston-Salem effort. There are 3 phases to the effort overall. The needs assessment phase, where we're looking at what's happening on the ground, what are those displacement pressures and needs. And I'm sharing with you some of the findings from that today. Then the next phase is developing a policy agenda to respond to those needs that we found, and we're working on that now, talking to a variety of stakeholders with various ideas to see what feels like it's going to make the biggest difference locally. And then once we have kind of a consensus on that agenda, picking some item from that overall agenda and really diving down into the details so that we have an implementable policy. So our hope is to not just end with, here's another study on the shelf, but an actual policy that can get adopted locally and make a difference. So as we go through this initiative, one of the values that's particularly important to us is racial equity. And I wanted to share with you some of the analysis we've done on that topic. So the racial divide in Winston-Salem is relatively easy to see because a highway runs through it. Highway 52 very much is a demarcation line, as I'm sure all know, in Winston-Salem. Neighborhoods in and around 52 and to the east of it tend to be mostly made up of households of color, and neighborhoods to the west tend to be predominantly white. And that's basically what this map shows. What's interesting or notable is even if we don't put race on the map, we still see that same pattern. And so what you should be seeing now is a map of median home values in Winston-Salem. And we see a distinct pattern. Those neighborhoods in and around Highway 52 and to the east have much lower home values. Those to the west, which are in predominantly white neighborhoods, have much higher home values. Same thing if we look at income, same kind of pattern. And I have a couple other maps I'm not showing you, but the pattern, no matter what socioeconomic measures we put up there, remains fairly solid, stable. This map is actually, for me, one of the most troubling ones in the entire presentation. It's based on an analysis by the Census Department. It's their opportunity analysis. And crunching all the data available to them, what they've done is projected into the future what a child growing up in any particular neighborhood in the city will earn in adulthood. And we see a very similar pattern as we saw in the previous slides. A child growing up on the east side of Winston-Salem is projected to earn 2, 3, 4, 5 times less than a child growing up on the west side of Winston-Salem. And I think for all of us, that kind of difference of where you grew up having such a big impact on your chances in life is just unacceptable. Now, this racial divide in Winston-Salem has been around so long, I think there's, it can kind of feel like it's a natural thing. And so what I wanted to raise up here is that it's not at all natural, that individual bias and discrimination has played a role, but so too has government policy. Winston-Salem early on had a race-based zoning ordinance telling people where they could live based on the color of the skin. Widely used were racially restrictive covenants, so people would put into deeds, reserving entire neighborhoods to white residents so that people of color were not allowed to live there. There was the federal redlining practices, which rated neighborhoods as too risky for banks to make loans in based on the presence of people of color in those neighborhoods. And that had this insidious effect of, white neighborhoods could get loans, fix up houses, build new houses. Neighborhoods of color couldn't. Those houses declined. There wasn't new construction, and so not only did it, have physical impacts, it also impacted this wealth gap in ways that we continue to see today. The GI Bill, very similar kind of thing on its face, available to all veterans. But because of where veterans could live and build houses, it allowed white veterans to build wealth while Black veterans could not. And of course, the Urban Renewal Program was used on its face to deal with blight, but almost invariably was used to tear down neighborhoods that were predominantly neighborhoods of color. And Highway 52 itself is an urban renewal project that, took away people's homes, disrupted Black businesses, disrupted Black churches and other institutions that had become centers of strength for the community. So all of that is to say, we created that with, public policy. And the hope, of course, is that we can undo it with public policy as well. And so instead of focusing on that racial divide, I want us to talk a little bit about the racial equity dividend we would enjoy if we were able to close that gap. And Winston-Salem has been working on closing that gap. What we're doing with the Forever and Home program, we hope will, help move the needle further in that direction. But we're not going to close it all the way with this effort, but we do hope to make that gap smaller. And if we are able to close that gap, if homes in neighborhoods of color were worth as much as the median home value in predominantly white neighborhoods, Winston-Salem homeowners would have an additional $1.8 billion of wealth across the city. Likewise, if income levels were equalized, we'd have another $705 million to spend in Winston-Salem to drive the economy, to support the schools, to improve our parks and everything folks love about Winston-Salem. Again, in the longer presentation, I've got more slides on this, but the overall point is the same, that there is a payoff for the whole community if we can make progress on this racial equity gap in the city. Now I want to turn a little bit to the needs assessment that we've been doing. And I wanted to start with this slide because it responds to a comment we heard from a lot of folks when we were doing outreach. People talk a lot about housing today. It feels more expensive, is less affordable than it used to be. And this chart helps answer why. And what it shows us is that the reason why it feels less affordable isn't so much because rents have gone up as it is that incomes have gone down. So that orange line on top of the chart shows us the relative change in rents since the year 2000. And it shows us that we're about 4% above where we were in 2000. All these numbers have been adjusted for inflation. So these are like real income changes, real dollar changes in rents. Likewise, the number on the bottom is the percent change in median renter income. And we see that in that recession in the 2000s, income has fell significantly, and it has just not recovered since then. We've seen an uptick in recent years. This goes through 2018, but we're still well below where it was in 2000. So housing feels less affordable because it is less affordable, because folks have to spend more of their income on rent because they simply have less income to go around altogether. And that in itself is a racial equity concern because of who renters and who owners are in Winston-Salem. Nearly 2/3 of white households in Winston-Salem are homeowners. Among households of color, that's almost flipped. About 61% of households of color are renters and just 39% are owners. And so that the housing cost burden that folks are experiencing falls more heavily on households of color than it does on white households. Because people are living so close to the edge economically, Winston-Salem has a very high eviction rate, and that is one of the statistics of concern that I think needs to get a bit more attention in the city, because it, particularly with the COVID-19, we went into COVID-19 with an already high eviction rate. As the moratorium has come off, as some of those social supports fade away, I'm really worried about what that's going to do to eviction rates down the road. So on this chart, we see we're about third in the state for eviction rates among cities population over 50,000. If we look nationally at cities of roughly the same size as Winston-Salem, we come in 6th nationally. So we've got a very high eviction rate no matter how you slice it. Another analysis we did was looking at displacement pressures in Winston-Salem. So where are neighborhoods changing relatively quickly and in a way that maybe pushing people out of neighborhoods, or when they do leave, not allowing folks who used to be able to afford that neighborhood to move back in, or maybe they're just not feeling welcome in that neighborhood anymore. And to do that analysis, we're following an analysis done by NALCAB, the National Association of Latino Community Asset Builders. And they looked at 4 different indicators of neighborhood change. One is housing costs, either median home values or rents, household income, the number of college graduates in the neighborhood, and the non-Hispanic white population. And so what we did was we looked at how those figures have changed between 2013 and 2018 for the city as a whole. And then we compared for each individual neighborhood, is it changing faster than the city as a whole? And if it is changing faster on any of those indicators, we gave it a score of 1 for that particular indicator. And this map shows you which neighborhoods came back with a score of either 3 or 4 on those indicators. So the dark red on your screen shows you the 4 indicators, and that sort of lighter red is 3 indicators. What we see is a lot of the displacement pressure is centered in and around downtown Winston-Salem, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to many folks, but also on the outer edges of the city, we're seeing some faster changing neighborhoods than we might expect. So there's areas experiencing displacement pressures, and as we're working on policy recommendations, we're going to want to address those. Another analysis we did was looking at the loss of existing subsidized housing units. So the brown dots on your screen on this map show you the location of all the subsidized housing developments that we could identify in Winston-Salem across the city. And then whenever the government provides money for affordable housing, that money comes with an affordability period. It says you must keep this housing affordable for 5 years, 10 years, 15, maybe 30 years. At some point, that affordability period expires. So I've added a star to all of the properties where the affordability period is expected to expire sometime before 2026. And as you can see on the screen, we actually have quite a few properties that are coming out of their affordability term, meaning the owners of those properties are free to take the market rate. Now, studies have shown most of those aren't going to go to market rate. It depends a lot on the conditions in the market where the properties are located. But those that are in sort of those red and yellow areas on the map are areas with higher rents. So those are properties where we may be particularly concerned that we will lose those as affordable properties down the road. Then the other thing I just wanted to highlight on this map, we've got quite a few properties in sort of those darker blue areas, which are lower rent areas, but that doesn't mean they're safe from being at risk of loss. The concern in those lower rent areas is the property owners may not have been able to charge enough rent to maintain the properties properly. They might not be able to refinance or rehab them in the future. And so we may lose those to disinvestment rather than to going market rate. So we've got concerns on both ends of those markets, and need to investigate many of those properties in more detail to see what the chances are that we might lose them and what resources we have available to address them. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the importance of building more inclusive neighborhoods. And to do that, I want to talk about these 3 tracks I've highlighted on the screen. Track 39.08 on the west side, track 2703, that's a little bit to the north and east, and then track 1602, which is on the east side over by the airport there. And if we look at those 3 tracks, and we look at, again, going back to that opportunity atlas, that west side tract, The census predicts that the average annual income in adulthood of a child who grows up in that neighborhood in a low-income household in that neighborhood would be about $45,000. In the tract to the north and east, 2703, that projected income drops almost in half to 24,000. And if you go all the way to that east side tract, we're down to a projected income of $17,000. Now, what's significant is the difference in opportunity to live in those neighborhoods. That tract where you can, a low-income child from a low-income household is projected to earn $45,000. There's only 4 units in that tract that would be affordable to a household earning 50% of area median income. And in those other tracts where the projected income in the future is much higher, or is much lower, there are hundreds to over 1,000 units that would be affordable to someone with earning a 50% of area median income. And so if you are a low-income resident, you don't have many choices, many opportunities to live in those higher opportunity neighborhoods. And I think while we don't need to make people move, I think we need to give people more choices to be able to move if they want. I'm going to talk just real briefly on next steps. We're doing this outreach, as Aaron said, we're doing presentations like this all over town. Paula McCoy is leading many of those locally. We hope to conduct a housing condition assessment. We heard from a lot of people that one of the concerns is the condition of housing, but it's hard to get good data on that. So we are putting together a pilot project to assess, it's a curbside assessment, but really get a sense of, at least from the outside, where does it look like we need to concentrate more rehab dollars, and what kinds of conditions are properties seeming to face. We are working on a policy agenda that we will be circulating and getting input on and working on getting consensus on going forward. And then from that, we want to develop that implementable policy with the hope of having that policy ready by the end of the year. So that is the overall presentation. As I said, I am ready for any questions you may have. And then I'm just going to put this slide on your screen. I would love to hear, if you don't have any particular question, I'd love to hear any of y'all weigh in on any of those questions if the chair feels like we've got time to do that. And I recognize we might not, because I tend to talk a lot. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Matt. So, I feel like the information, is always interesting to know where we are, but also more sobering to know how we got here. So, that information is very interesting, quite disturbing in some points as well. I do have one question for you, though. On the, I think it was the next, about 4 charts back on the inclusive community.
Yep.
And you dealt with 3 census tracts, and the last tract, census tract 16.02.
Yep.
Are those tracts broken down by zip code, where that's like 27101 or 27103?
Typically, the zip code would actually be a little bit larger than those tracts.
Okay, so the tract is not zip code specific?
No.
Okay. All right, that's my question. So I think, we can open it up for discussion. If anybody wants to, we can probably have a good 5 to 10 minute discussion if there are any questions for Matt.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Hi. I was just really blown away by this. There's so much to absorb, and wonder if we could have a copy of this presentation so that we could look at the charts more carefully.
No, sure, absolutely. And we've got a written version draft of that too that we can circulate. We've got a little bit of, I've got some typos in there I got to fix up, but I can get that to Aaron, and Aaron can share it around.
Great. And the other thing is, I was struck by the chart you showed of how incomes went down and never really recovered after the Great Recession. Do you see down the road an impact from the pandemic that may be of a similar nature? And should we be planning for that now too?
Yeah, and honestly, one of the things that really troubles me on the pandemic, and it happened in that 2008 bubble too, is folks face distress. They end up, these are particularly for homeowners, they end up losing their homes in the middle of that distress, and companies that have the capital available swoop in and buy them and just hold on to them until the market has recovered, and then suddenly they're charging higher rents for those homes themselves. So it just adds more urgency to putting these kinds of policies in place to get us ready as a community to deal with those kinds of challenges.
I'd like to ask something if we have time, Mr. Chairman. Oops.
Yes. Jack, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
How are we doing now? My apologies.
Now you're good.
We're good. Matt, I think your data is incredibly eye-opening and telling and realistic. The most surprising thing to me that I had never imagined was what appeared to be so many intentional policies of the past. So I'm all about let's change those. Going forward, one thing that I don't recall seeing specifically, and I know there's a whole lot of causes to this and a whole lot of different cures, but one that absolutely intrigues me and moves to the top of my list is opportunities for educational advancement and how that's incorporated into a program like this. I will speak as someone who was born into a low-income household and education delivered me from it.
Well, one thing, if I can add to that, what he said about the low income, and then if you are in like a median income, you have the 3 census tracts, the one with the highest income. If you are from a low income family on that census tract, you had nowhere to stay in that community in terms of your expected income. So I guess that when you talked about the integration of affordable housing, is that sort of the solution to that you're talking about?
I'm not quite following the question, but yeah, I think the challenge is those higher opportunity neighborhoods don't have many opportunities for
Exactly.
low-income folks to actually live there.
Because one of the things that we see would be like in local high schools, you'll have students that can move, that live in a lower income, go to a better school in a higher income neighborhood. They get their education, but still they have such a disadvantage from where they originated, they can't come back and live in their peers that they grew up and went to school with, therefore doing that. And I think that's one of the big things that really needs to change.
On that same page 28, where you had those 3 different tracks, the middle track showed $24,000 worth of income, and then there were like 1,100 units available for people making half of the median income. So not making half of 24,000, but making half of Forsyth County's median income, 34,000, 35,000. So people making 17, 18,000, there's 1,100 choices for housing in that. And yet there would be 4 in that first track.
Right.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Matt?
Yeah, Matt, what year was the pie chart that you had on renting? Because we've seen a massive change in renting in Winston. I'm sorry, my electricity's out. We've seen a major change in renting in Winston-Salem area.
Yeah, so except for the eviction data, almost all the data is from 2018, including that rental information.
So Matt, is this information, do you talk to other organizations about this? if someone wanted you to speak regarding this issue?
Yeah, largely. So Paula McCoy, whom I imagine is
Yep.
familiar to many of you, is our local community engagement consultant. It is we value community engagement. It's very hard for us to do that remotely. So we went into this hiring somebody local to be able to do that. And she's largely doing presentations like this locally. So again, talk to Erin and we can help. If there's anyone out there who wants that presentation, we can help get Paula in front of you.
All right, thank you so very much. Final couple of questions of anyone?
Just a comment, a lot of corporations now are seeking information like this as a floor for discussion of what issues face communities of color. And so I appreciate the report very much. And I hope to get a copy of it even to share with my own company. And I hope that it will be something that the rest of us will make an effort, a collective effort together to make information like this widely known, because there are folks out there that just don't get it. They just don't believe that there is a problem. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get your education. Speaking candidly as a man of color, while I am an educated man, as some of my colleagues in this group are, I still earn less than many of my counterparts with the same IQ, with the same education. And I aspire to live as best I can and do the best for my family, but it's just not the same start at the starting line.
Exactly.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll just add a couple kind of closing comments, and certainly if there's any other questions, I don't want to interrupt those. But I thought Matt's presentation was timely, and for a lot of the reasons that you've seen today. But as you see from this presentation, there's a big equity piece. That's sort of what's front and center, and a lot of what Matt's data and what Tommy and a lot of others have kind of hit on is there's an equity piece to this. And I will just tell you, you know, we will probably begin discussions next year on in the early stages for a new comprehensive plan. We're kind of on that cycle, and next year is probably when staff will begin its work in earnest on that. And, you know, from our staff's been doing a lot of thinking about that, because a lot of time has elapsed since 2010 when we began work on Legacy 2030. I fully believe that this next comp plan will have a component to it that centers on equity and racial equity and housing. It will likely have a much different feel, because as you can see, that as you think about a comprehensive plan for our community, the issues that Matt presented are front and center. We've got to address those through planning, through development, through the built environment, whatever we can do in the planning world. We need to be thinking about that a little more critically. So I'm glad Matt was able to have this discussion, because I think it's good to start introducing that concept and thinking about it a little bit in the work that we do, because I do believe it's going to become more prominent and more important in the work that we see coming forward. And I believe that will be a big part of future plans and our future comprehensive plan. So it's good to start thinking about that. And as you can see, we've got a lot of work to do to write some of these issues that Matt identified through his presentation. So I'm glad to kind of get that information out there and at least kind of start that discussion. So
thank you. Thank you again, Matt.
Thank you all.
Well done.
Great
Thank you.
evening.
Matt, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow morning for our call.
Yep. Bye, Aaron.
All right. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next item on our agenda is our Downtown Streetscape Master Plan, and Amy Crum is going to be giving the presentation on this. I think she's probably got a PowerPoint she's going to be pulling up. This is a project we've been working on for quite some time, and this is really a plan to give some thought in our downtown area about really what happens in the public realm, basically between the building walls downtown. So your streets, your sidewalks, your landscaping, all of the above. And so we have got this. There's been a significant amount of input, of public input, and Amy will detail that. But we've gotten this to a point now to where we're comfortable bringing this to you for a for a briefing, and then hopefully for a public hearing at your August meeting. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Amy and she can begin her remarks.
All right, good afternoon. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
All right, just to give a little background to remind everyone of how we got to where we are today. Both the downtown plan and Legacy 2030 have recommendations speaking to creating standards for the downtown, streetscape standards for the downtown. And then in 2016, as some of you may remember, we did the downtown streetscape plan report. And in that report, we sort of highlighted the sort of mismatch, hodgepodge nature of streetscape elements within downtown. You think of, sidewalk materials, lighting is a big one, and all the different varieties we have. And in 2017, we were able to get funding through the Winston-Salem MPO for STPDA planning funds to do a plan. So we sent out an RFQ, or request for qualifications for a consultant. We got I think 11 different responses in, and we went through the selection process. And in 2018, MIG was selected and put under contract to do the plan. And they began that in the fall of 2018. And then through 2019, we've done public outreach in the finalizing of the plan. To remind everyone, the project boundary is essentially the main core of downtown. We have 8th Street to the north, Broad Street to the west, Business 40, Salem Parkway to the south, and then Patterson Avenue to the east. Wake Forest Innovation Quarter, or the Innovation Quarter, is not included as part of this. Neither is the West End neighborhood. So we began the process with an online survey and an in-person surveys. The online survey was very interactive, where folks could have, you can see one of the maps there. They could put a little dot on the map and speak where they think items were needed, or where they have an issue that they wanted to see resolved. We had over 1,000 people respond and participate through that survey. We had over 7,000 individual map responses. And we also did pop-up meetings at the library in different places downtown, where folks could come in and do a more hands-on approach to filling out these survey questions. And through the survey, when speaking about different improvements that people wanted to see, the top 2 improvements were lighting and then trees. Those were top 2. And then you think about spaces for public gatherings, public art, and then innovative ways of expressing our story as a city. And then we moved on to stakeholder meetings. We had a staff advisory committee made up of city staff and state and CDOT staff, as well as 2 individuals from the Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership and the county were represented on that committee. We had 5 different meetings throughout the process. We also had a downtown leadership visioning session to start the process, as well as stakeholder meetings with individuals related to accessibility, thinking, WISTA, and the adaptables with ADA accessibility. We also met with artists in the creative class to get their input, as well as meeting with multiple meetings with Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership to get their input along the way. We also held 3 rounds of community workshops. These are very interactive. The first one was a design charrette. Also, we had some that you can see the pictures in the bottom, where it was sort of interactive. Folks could do the dot exercise, placing their dots on what pictures they liked and what they wanted to see. Those were held at both at the lunch and in the evening, so that try to be as most accommodating as we could to people's schedules. And it was held downtown. And we got approximately about 140, 150 people participating through those workshops. And through all this information, a community vision for downtown started to take shape. And what folks wanted to see, you can see listed here, is that it'd be safe and well connected, be diverse, and both in terms of what type of economic, retail and commercials there, but also in who the users are, making sure that we can accommodate a broad range of users. Again, supporting economic and business development, being environmentally sustainable, outdoor dining, connecting to neighborhoods, again, trying to create the outdoor living environment, so places to socialize, calming traffic, being financially sustainable and well-maintained, and then also creating, celebrating our history and having local art. One thing I want to bring up is, in all of this, is they also looked at assets and they looked at some of the limitations we have in downtown. And one of the key limitations we have downtown is our lack of right-of-way. It's very constrained. The dark green you see there is 60 feet of right-of-way, and it makes up the majority of downtown, but it's usually between 40 and 60 feet. And so when you look at everything that people want, from outdoor dining to wide sidewalks to on-street parking and bike facilities, and be able to have vehicular traffic moving through, you get a lot of conflicts. We can already see that, and that's the existing conditions photo there. But how do you determine which element takes priority? And so that's been one of the key sort of elements that's throughout this plan. So looking at the plan, the consultant was tasked with creating a prioritization of the streets. And then if you can remember back to the report that was done in 2016, we had a prioritization of streets based off sort of their use. And it was primary, secondary, and tertiary. For this, they really looked at how they function and what do these streets function as and what their role is within downtown. And that's how they created their street typology. And the design guidelines and the palette that's selected within the plan, it sort of goes back and is based upon this street typology. So destination streets are your key, like I said, destination, 4th Street, Trade Street. This is where people come, they hang out. This is their sort of outdoor living room space. People congregate here. Community connector streets, think, Cherry Marshall's prime examples. These are the streets that are used to get people into and out of downtown and through downtown. These are your people movers, and we want to make sure that these streets move all types of users, whether it be cyclists, transit users, motorists, or pedestrians. And then neighborhood streets are exactly what they say they are, and it really centers around the Holly Avenue neighborhood. These are residential streets, and so they function very, very differently than something like Trade Street or 4th Street would function, and so therefore the design needs to respect that. And then we have urban flex streets, and these are the streets that kind of don't fit in any one category. So we're still trying to, they're still transitioning per se. So Chestnut, Church Street, they're not community connector streets, they're not destination streets, they're sort of somewhere in the middle. You have 7th Street, which is in transition as to what it will become. Sort of a lot of the elements, in retail and businesses are sort of moving north. Anything on Trade and Liberty heading towards 8th Street, and then you have Industry Hill sort of coming on board. So it's trying to see how does 7th Street come into play into that, and what does that become? And we look at the guidelines and you look at the palette, there's 5 overarching themes. We want it to be high quality materials, focus on some key high quality elements that serve the downtown, be context sensitive and timeless. You really celebrate those destination streets, create a cohesive downtown identity. Again, that's this whole sort of process was to get a set of furnishings, a cohesive set of furnishings that we could then implement. Be multi-purpose and multi-benefit. As I've said, downtown has very tight right-of-way, so therefore things have to have multiple benefits to it. We just don't have a lot of space for individual items. So you think of street trees, they have an aesthetic appeal to them, they provide shade, which is lovely, but they also calm traffic, which is one of the elements. And then it has to be maintenance friendly. This is something we heard repeatedly, maintenance. So pretty much every element that we discussed, maintenance was a key factor in determining what was proposed. One of the design elements that's a little different that they are proposing, that was proposed through this plan, was this idea of flexible parking. And I think prior to COVID, a lot of people couldn't understand this concept, but now people are really sort of getting behind it. But it's the idea of using this space that was, initially designated for on-street parking and sort of seeing how it could be used. On days where on-street parking is key, think, lunchtime, Monday through Friday, people are popping in and out. It's really time sensitive. That space would be used as actual on-street parking. But on the weekends, when folks had a little bit more time, people can hang out, they can stroll, they can gather, then you focus on the priority being on the pedestrian and on the sort of visitors to downtown rather than on parking spaces. And that space is then used for outdoor dining space. So it's creating a little bit of flexibility in how we utilize that space that's designated for parking. And then the palette of materials, I won't go through everything in there. They are listed in chapter 6, I believe, of the plan, but they touch on the streetscape, softscape elements like trees. There is a tree planting plan and a tree management plan that provides detailed information on what specific trees should be used, what pattern or layout they should be done in, and it also talks about soil conditions and advocating and recommending using structured soils as a substrate. And in terms of hardscape elements, we have palette for paving, such as sidewalks and crosswalks, furnishings, seating, lighting, trash cans, bike parking, as well as other elements, sort of the multi-sensorial elements and the sort of art elements to be used as well in terms of creating, sound where we can, fun, interactive elements where we can. You think of, the wind chimes that are on the lights now on 4th Street as a sort of multi-sensorial element, and also creating elements that, art racks. You can see one in the picture there, the River Run art rack. So it's a bike rack, but it's an artful piece as well. Some artful seating as well, incorporating art where we can. And that is all I have. And I will answer any questions folks may have.
I've got a question, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues I see with downtown, first of all, let me just compliment you on this presentation. I think this is a great plan. I just had one issue that I see as a potential problem with downtown, and that is people with limited mobility getting around. And I didn't really understand that until last summer when I was on crutches trying to move around downtown. And there really are, there's 4 designated handicap places on Cherry and 4th. Some of those are used by trucks offloading goods. But that's in the center of your destination street on 4th Street. But there aren't any farther away from that. Like if you wanted to go further down towards Broad Street, or if you wanted to go towards the Milton Road Center, I mean, it would be really hard for someone who is on crutches, for example, to park where those spots are and then try to get anywhere. So just wondering if you thought about opening up some more designated handicap spots further out on the destination streets.
This plan didn't go into specifics about, handicap spaces. We did bring in folks from, to talk about accessibility. A lot of that was deemed more towards, the actual sidewalks themselves and the conflicts people are having with, outdoor dining, and then you have a tree and then you have a light, and, you can't get by, easily if you're in a wheelchair or have some mobility issues. But we didn't actually, that wasn't brought up as the number of handicap parking spaces, but that would be something, DOT could look into pretty much any time in designating more of those outside of this process completely.
I appreciate that part of the plan calls for adding more on-street parking through the redesign of streets. And as such, there may be some opportunities to add a few more designated spots that way.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Amy?
If there are otherwise not more, I've got some some matters that I'd like to bring up, which I would begin by saying, I think the immense number of people that have been reached out to in this process and the design talent that has been employed is absolutely stellar. This is an excellent design plan. My biggest concern going forward is what I perceive as a need to spend a little more time to make it a little more implementable rather than just design oriented. I can't tell what the public and private fair share is of the cost of these improvements. It's unclear what department's going to be administering it. It's unclear where the money is going to come from to implement it. And I really would encourage us to not consider this all the way done just yet, but for us to really focus on how we're going to carry it out. And with that additional attention, I will just once more say it is an absolutely brilliant study from a design point of view. We just need to define how we're going to implement it. Thank you.
And then I'll throw in there too, you know, I remember we had, it's been a while ago, another presenter who discussed the Marshall Park, that design and the park area there. You know, we brought it up then. You know, I think when you look at the face of downtown, the face of downtown is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and it's pricing people out. Even young professionals is pricing out a lot of young professionals. Had a presentation from a young attorney who graduated from Wake Forest and practices downtown, but she says she can't afford to live downtown, you know, because as a starting attorney, your income is not, you know, $100,000. So I think we need to keep that in mind as we're continuing to put city dollars into these projects that I'm downtown all the time, and there are a lot of people still sitting on the park bench and on the downtown bench, and there's a lot of poverty still downtown. But again, great design, Amy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add one comment, Mr. Chair, that kind of touches on Jack's, some of Jack's concerns. So think about this a little bit like we do area plans. This is a big picture, high level policy document. You know, really what we're thinking about now is, did we corral the right issues? Parking, sidewalks, landscape. Did we get the right issues in there? And have we thought about the correct things? And did we participate in the public? And did we do those things correctly? And once this plan is adopted, you know, that kind of sets the general policies. What we would be what we'll be coming back with subsequent to that is we've got to find some way to codify and make this, put it into regulatory terms. So that will be sort of phase 2 that will be coming somewhere after adoption. Is our staff will be sitting down with downtown stakeholders and city officials and whoever to start saying, okay, well, you know, now what does it mean? Now, if you want to build a courtyard by Marriott beside Foothills, we've got these ideas. What does that mean to that builder? What does that person have to do? Because right now there's no standards. You can just build on your land and off you go. And so the implementation piece of this will come.
Mm-hmm.
We begin to develop those standards through a text amendment to say, okay, when somebody comes in to meet with us and say, you know, we're going to redesign and redevelop the Pepper Building into Hotel Indigo, we can say, well, okay, this section of the UDO says you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z, and everybody has a clear understanding of what that means. So there will be more definition as we move into the implementation stage through the text amendment process.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Aaron.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. The next item, we have 2 text amendments left on your agenda, and we'll run through those. The next one, item 3, is a text amendment dealing with industrial uses, and Steve Smotherman's going to present this, and I think Amy's got maybe some slides to pull up, and I'll mention as a bit of background. We have seen a few rezonings over the years, probably in the last 18 to 24 months, where, and a couple of these have been over in the Stratford Industrial Center over off of Stratford Road, where we've had, it's largely zoned GI, and somebody wants to develop a use, maybe it's motorcycle dealer or furniture store that's got an industrial feel, but it's not allowed in that district. And I believe it was on one of those, and we were out in the van for sign check, and I believe Melinda was there, and I believe George was actually the person that made the comment that said, you know, it seems like there's kind of a blending of what's industrial and what's kind of this heavy commercial feel, and we're seeing some of these rezonings, and we agree. We went back and we gave some study to that, and so that's kind of issue 1 that Steve's going to talk to you about, maybe some ideas to improve that. And then issue 2 is how we handle our industrial uses, manufacturing A and B. We were a little bit out of kilter with our triad peers, especially in how we handle kind of outdoor storage of goods. And when we got some feedback, and we agree there, yeah, we were a little out of whack. And so sort of bucket 2 that Steve is going to talk to you about is sort of how we've kind of gone back in and made some adjustments in those industrial districts, specifically around kind of the outdoor storage and screening component. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you, and you can go ahead and begin your remarks.
Okay. Yeah, Amy can do that. As Aaron mentioned, we wanted to add heavy commercial uses to reduce the incidence of people wanting to rezone it to commercial uses. And as those of you that know me, trying to maintain industrial zoning is near and dear to my heart. So we are going to proposing adding some commercial uses to the LI and GI districts. As Aaron mentioned, we're also going to add proposing outdoor storage area requirements to manufacturing B, and we're also going to simplify and consolidate definitions of manufacturing A and manufacturing B into one countywide definition. So next slide, Amy. As Aaron mentioned, that we've had business zoning requests in 2017, 2018, both in Stratford Industrial Park, and they were zoned to general business. And the list of uses that they were requesting, some of them made sense and some of them didn't. So we thought if we could standardize those type of uses that made sense in industrial districts, the heavy commercial uses, we could include them. And as Aaron also mentioned, we tried to get more of a distinction between manufacturing A and manufacturing B uses. Next slide, Amy. So after reviewing the big 5 cities in North Carolina, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, we looked at the 6 commercial uses that we think make sense. One is a car wash. The other is a furniture and home furnishing store, institutional vocational training facility, which we allow vocational training, but we don't allow this institutional use, which is like or similar to industries for the blind, that type of thing. Motorcycle dealer, retail lawn and garden stores, and outdoor display retail, which primarily automobile and motor vehicle sales. Amy, next slide. And we think that a lot of those, let me go back on those uses for just a moment. A lot of those make sense, particularly for the motor vehicle, because the sales is because they're allowed, we currently allow motor vehicle rental and leasing in the industrial district, but we don't allow sales. So a lot of that makes sense. Car wash, there are a lot, I suspect there are a couple of companies that may not have a commercial car wash, but they do truck washes or whatever probably occur in some locations in industrial areas. But as Aaron mentioned, we try to make greater distinction The definitions of currently for manufacturing A and manufacturing B is talk about impacts, which is noise, odor, pollution, etc. The definitions are about the same, except manufacturing A says there shall be minimal impact on adjoining properties, and manufacturing B currently says there should be minor impact. So how do you objectively decide what's minimal and what's minor? So we decided to, and after looking at our peer cities, we currently don't allow any outdoor storage for manufacturing A uses as a group, and we don't allow it for manufacturing B uses as a group. Manufacturing C does not have screening requirements for the group of uses listed in manufacturing C as a group, but that doesn't mean that individual uses such as quarries or salvage yards, those may have screening requirements as well. So don't think that any heavy industrial use doesn't have any screening requirements. But just want to make that the definition manufacturing C, whatever group of uses are included in that, they're not, the screening is not required, or outdoor storage or screening is not required as a general requirement. But we are proposing that it would be required for manufacturing B. Next slide, Amy. And so the proposed screening requirements for manufacturing B would be that the outdoor storage area have to be located to the side or the rear of a principal building and not be visible from public rights of way. The other option is that if it is visible, that it be screened by opaque materials, brick, stone, a minimum of 6 feet in height from the public rights of way, or that they install a type 3 buffer yard. And that there is an exemption, which is similar to outdoor tanks for manufacturing B and A uses, that if the outdoor storage area is located more than 500 feet from a public right of way, they don't have to put in any screening. I also want to mention that if introducing this outdoor storage for manufacturing B, we're also proposing that manufacturing B no longer be allowed in the central industrial district, which is the downtown area, because we don't want to see, outdoor storage in the innovation corridor or places like that. That doesn't need to happen. So next slide, Amy, please. And then the final amendment is to consolidate the city and county definitions of manufacturing A and the manufacturing B into one county-wide definition. And as I mentioned, the manufacturing B will now, as a statement about screening of outdoor storage. The only distinction otherwise between the two definitions is that the Winston-Salem definition includes indoor agriculture as a permitted operation in both manufacturing A and B. And that was a result of an urban agricultural amendment that was only approved by Winston-Salem. So staff decided not, instead of having to go to the county to try to explain this and get their agreement just to have comparable definitions, they were separated. But now that we are going to be going to the county for this amendment as well as the city, we can combine the definitions back into a single one. So synchronizing the definitions will certainly simplify the unified development ordinance. And next slide, Amy, I think that's, and we, as Aaron said, with the background, we certainly recommend approval of this text amendment. So I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Steve.
Yes.
What districts allow manufacturing B?
Most of the time it depends on the use, but I think primarily there is some LI and GI, but it depends on the use.
It looks like manufacturing B is allowed in LI and GI and CI currently, and as Steve stated, we're proposing to remove that from CI, so it would just be allowed in LI and GI.
I've got a question about the screening and visibility, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
In the way the ordinance is written, it talks about it's the contiguous public right of way.
Yes.
So but when you look at when screening's not required, it's if it's greater than 500 feet away.
Yes.
So you could have a public right of way that's not contiguous, but it's closer than the 500 feet. So how do you make sure that visibility is protected?
Well, I'm presuming that if it's not contiguous, that there's another property in between the property with the screening and what's not.
But it could be a portion of the property that's vacant or a parking lot or something that there is nothing in between it.
That might be close to the public right of way. Currently it's not, as far as I know, that's not addressed because that's currently how the buffering requirements for outdoor storage tank was written was based on its visibility from public rights of way.
There's just a little inconsistency there in what we're expecting if it's being visible or not.
So that's a bit like, and we run into that issue sometimes where maybe you've got a commercial use that's adjacent to a commercial use, and then 2 doors down is a residential use. And because the one commercial use against the other doesn't require a buffer yard, the commercial use is fine, but the residential use is still in close proximity to where, so we can give some more thought to that. I don't know if we're going to come up with a perfect solution because we kind of deal with that now with respect to buffer yards and other issues when you kind of got the next door down sort of situation, but we can give some more thought to that.
So as we're moving these uses around and changing them, that sort of popped out as something maybe we can look at. I don't know if there is a solution or not, but we can take a look at it.
Good point.
Yep.
I've got one screening question also, Steve. In your presentation, the slide spoke to the screening material basically being consistent with the exterior of the building, be it brick or a masonry or concrete or whatever. Would that preclude metal screening from older metal buildings, which we have a lot of on the sides and back especially?
Aaron, how would you interpret? I would interpret that, I guess, if it's an old metal building, would they be able to have metal screening?
That's something we probably need to look at. I mean, we can take a look at those materials. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I think what staff is trying to do is to, you know, we understand there, number one, we've got 2 definitions that are basically the exact same, which is not providing any value to the community. So let's try to stratify those uses, those definitions to where they make more sense. And in doing so, manufacturing A, clearly everything in the building, manufacturing B, you have some stuff outside, but you need to screen it so that it's not negatively impacting the public on public rights of way, and doing it in a reasonable fashion. So, you know, whether that's landscaping or you know, brick or wood fence or whatever, that's really the intent. I will tell you, you know, we deal with screening standards a lot when we deal with motor vehicle repair and maintenance uses. And that actually rose to a level to where City Council directed a study of that. I guess it was almost 3 years ago now that we've been continuing to work on. And there are screening standards for those motor vehicle repair and maintenance uses. And that's a tricky one to deal with when you kind of, unless you have some tight standards, you would be surprised at what you get. And the last thing we want to do is have screening that looks worse than what's behind there that you're screening. So, you know, that's some of the thought that went into this. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's just some of the thought that went into what we've got.
Yeah, and that's understood. I'll just say one more time, especially in industrial buildings constructed, say pre-1990, we oftentimes have an attractive facade facing the street with metal sides and back exterior walls. And we're even seeing some new design that recommend a one exterior metal wall for future expansion purposes. So I just didn't know if it was going to be our intent to exclude metal from a permissible material or not in those situations.
I think we've got enough options on the plate for folks who, you know, if you've got your metal building and you want to do some outdoor storage of materials, you know, certainly a wooden fence is available, certainly landscaping is available. You know, if you want to go for a higher end product, you've got masonry products that are available. I think there are enough options out there that folks can do this where they're not backed into a corner to having only to select a really high end screening method. There are some other pretty reasonable priced solutions to screen whatever they're putting in.
But not metal.
I would say probably not. No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just searching for clarification.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of these buildings around.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we're certainly not required that they have to match the building, but something would make sense. And I wouldn't want to see metal extensions either.
All right.
Great. All right. Thank you, Steve. And we'll be setting this up for a public hearing at your August meeting. So we will move to item 4 on your agenda, which is our last text amendment. That's UDO CC 5. And David Reed is going to present this. This is a text amendment that is trying to address a little issue that we ran into with respect to our Historic Resources Commission in light of some of the challenges that have been brought about by COVID-19. So I will turn it over to David and let him begin.
Okay, well, UDO CC 5 would amend the time frame that the Historic Resource Commission, or HRC, has to act on certificates of appropriateness, or COAs, for historic properties. So right now, the requirement is 120 days, and the general statute allows it to be up to 180 days. We actually had to cancel some meetings that we need to have in person because it's a quasi-judicial board. And because of that, we would like to have the flexibility of the full 180 days in case there's any future reason to cancel meetings again, like what happened this spring. So we're simply recommending to make that change consistent to what's allowed in the general statutes to go from acting in at least 120 days to acting in at least 180 days. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
And I'll just add a little bit to what David presented. When we kind of got into the situation with COVID-19, the state passed Senate Bill 704, which laid out procedures for virtual meetings, and that's a lot of what governs what we're doing here and things of that nature. What we're able to do with the planning board, since you guys are not acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, we've got a little more flexibility on what we do. When you are considering quasi-judicial matters through a virtual meeting, the rules that we've been given by the state make that quite a challenge. And that's what's led to some of the issues that David noted. And that's why staff is saying we could sure use those extra 2 months there, because at the end of the day, what happens is if the board doesn't act within 120 days, the application is deemed approved. And that's certainly not the intent, is for folks to kind of find a way through the system without having the proper vetting. So again, we kind of have imposed a tighter deadline on ourselves in Winston-Salem to act within 120 days when the state says we've actually got 180. So we're just asking to go back to what the state lays out, is that 180-day window.
Aaron, would this also apply to the quasi-judicial Board of Adjustment?
We don't have the same requirement in Board of Adjustment standards. It's just really in the section for Historic Resources Commission for COAs.
Thank you.
All right. I think if there's no other questions on that, that will also be coming to you at your August public hearing meeting for action on that item.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, moving forward, we have our debrief from our public hearing on July 9th, our very brief public hearing meeting. Anyone have any thoughts, comments from that meeting? All right, we're moving to staff report, Aaron.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything to report. So that's a brief staff report for you. So that's all I've got.
All right, if anybody has a generator, take it over to George's house. I guess he's still without electricity. We need to look out for him. We are our brother's keeper. All right, if nothing else for the good of the order.
All right, we have our motion to adjourn. Everybody stay dry.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.